Hello, I'm Gretchen Buggeln, Duesenberg Professor of Christianity and the Arts. It is my pleasure to provide this virtual homecoming lecture about the origins and history of an actual building, Mueller Hall, home of Christ College, for 50 years. I hope you enjoy my talk. In the spring semester of 1970, Mueller Hall opened for classes. Since then, this building has shaped the experience of every Christ College student, influenced what we can do here, and served the wider Valparaiso University community in many ways. Mueller Hall embodies the late 1960s, the dissatisfaction with the old ways of doing things, hope for what might be, and a commitment to serious and rigorous dialogue. At the same time, Mueller reflects appreciation for an older, exalted tradition of the great university, one that, in the 1960s, appeared humane and dignified when compared with the increasingly impersonal and chaotic nature of American higher education. In this presentation, I'm going to do three things. First, I will provide some local architectural context by looking at the development of the Valpo campus around this time. Second, I will consider the architect of Mueller Hall and his collaboration with our local Christ College design team. Finally, I will talk about some details of the original Mueller interior plan, finishes, and furnishings, as well as discuss changes made in later renovations to the building. To begin, let's get a sense of the way our campus developed in the 1950s and 60s, a time when many post-war college campuses were expanding at breakneck speed. As the number of students grew by leaps and bounds, the university moved dorms, offices, and operations to a 100-acre tract of former farmland to the east of Old Campus. This image from about 1957 shows the newly built Union, Hughley Hall, and the chapel, which is under construction. It would open in 1959. The red arrow on the right marks the future site of Mueller Hall. Mueller Library opened in 1959, and in 1961, Sheol Hall opened, followed quickly by Brandt in 1962 and Lankenau in 1964. Campus construction continued to boom through the 1960s, as declared by this article in the Chicago Tribune from May of 1965. In short, one of the important contexts for Mueller Hall was the rapid expansion of our campus. These sprawling orange brick buildings are not what one would call extravagant or even especially path-breaking in design, but they were handsome buildings that were modern and accommodating. In January of 1967, our founding dean, Richard Bepler, emphasized in his first report to the university board that the new experimental honors college would not fully thrive until it had a brick and mortar home. That year, anonymous donors pledged over $1 million to build a permanent headquarters for the Honors College, an amount that's equal to over $8 million today. The anonymous donors were board member Reverend Ewald Mueller, pastor of Bethlehem Lutheran Church in Ridgewood, New Jersey, and his wife Joan, and the building was renamed Mueller Hall in 1978. Charles Staude of Park Ridge, Illinois, was the architect most responsible for the look of our post-war campus, but he was not the designer of Mueller Hall. The university awarded this commission to New Jersey architect and personal friend of the donors, Herman Bowman, a pastor's son from rural Minnesota and a devout Lutheran. Bowman was known for his work on public elementary and high schools on the East Coast, and his firm had designed the education and gym expansion for the Mueller's New Jersey church. The design process was collaborative. Most of what I know about it comes from conversations with Dick Bepler, the founding dean, Dick Brower, a member of the art faculty at the time, and the late Dick Lee. I'm grateful to all of them for sharing their memories. By all accounts, it was an absorbing, incredibly fast process of design, redesign, and redesign. The committee looked at dozens of plans, and right down to the wire they made significant changes, largely because of runaway inflation that increasingly limited the possibilities for construction. In 1959, President O.P. Kretzmann had articulated a vision for a university that was both Athens and Jerusalem, a place that balanced and integrated reason and faith. And this became a core aim of the Honors College as well. The design team had the opportunity to give form to this idea. The Honors College was experimental, and that spirit carried over into the design. It was to be a space that both allowed for and actively promoted intense discussion and collegial relationships between faculty, students, staff, and guests. And here you see a symposium in the Commons from 1973, not long after the building first opened. Bepler wrote to recent Valpo grad Dick Lee, who was finishing a doctorate in California, and asked for his help and advice with the building project. Lee soon returned to Valpo as the first Christ College faculty appointment and began finding out what he could about Honors College architecture. In part, Mueller was modeled on a British college idea. This was partly the result of conversations between Bepler and John Striedelmeyer, editor of the Crescent, who had recently returned from a sabbatical year at Cambridge. Both men liked the personal scale and integrated nature of Cambridge's colleges. Translated into architecture, this meant small seminar rooms, a commons, a refectory or dining hall, a courtyard green space, readily accessible faculty offices, and integrated social spaces, including, as we'll see, residential spaces. School design in the 1960s struggled to keep up with social change and experimental educational programming. Unlike the open and airy designs of the 1950s, 1960s schools are typically heavy, low, concrete or brick buildings with massive fascia that make them seem even more immobile. Working with the CC committee, Bowman, the architect, had to balance all of these needs and trends. What was current in school design, the aims of the Athens and Jerusalem equation, the emphasis on the British college model, and the unique character of Valpo's campus. Here is Dean Bepler showing some students the first fully fleshed out design for the building, one the university board approved in October of 1967. It's intriguing that Bowman's early design for this building had a distinctive churchly element, which you see in what was called the Great Hall. It's not super clear in this image, but in the middle of the building is something that looks very much like a mid-century A-frame church. By the time the plans were finalized in 1968, the building included a central commons, flanked on either side by rooms for independent study and for the study of art and music. The planners also wanted a modern lecture hall that could fit the entire freshman class of 60. Behind a central courtyard was a refectory with a stage, a multi-purpose space that could be used as a dining hall for the whole community, or a room for large theater productions. Behind this was a modern, industrial-sized kitchen. You may be intrigued to see residence halls as part of the honors complex, shown here as wings on each side of the central building. These were designed to hold about 50 students each, men on one side, women on the other. Rooms were arranged in a cutting-edge suite model with bedrooms clustered in small groups around community living areas. There were also small apartments for faculty or staff residents. The anti-elitism of the time led some faculty and students to oppose the idea of integral dorms, for they feared that this would isolate the honor students from the rest of the campus community. There is some truth to this memory, yet the primary reason the dorms weren't built apparently had much more to do with money. At the time of the dedication, in fact, references continued to be made to future residences, something that was called Phase 2 of this building project. In the summer of 1968, just before the groundbreaking, a significant 11th hour change was the addition of a full basement. While the dorms were out of reach financially, digging a pit and putting 11 temporary classrooms in a few offices underneath was feasible and seemed to be a way to address classroom space issues on the campus. Dick Lee told me that another impetus for this move was that at this time, many campus building projects were partially funded by federal loans. President Albert Hughley was concerned that the university would not be able to teach theology in government-funded buildings, and he liked the idea of putting theology in the cellar of a building paid for by private funds. As it turns out, Hughley was wrong about the church-state problem, but the classrooms turned out to be a boon for the university. They were much better than the temporary classroom building on Old Campus and closer to the new dorms. And of course, there's a long history of the many uses for this basement. Among other things, it was the home of the Lutheran Society for Worship, Music, and the Arts, Urban Studies, and somewhat ironically, in a windowless basement, the home of Geography and Meteorology. Finally, in the late summer of 1968, someone handed Dean Bepler a shovel and construction began. And here you see him in the center. To your left is President Hughley, and to your right, just to the right of Dean Bepler, is, of course, President Emeritus O.P. Kretzmann. A year and a half later, the building was in full use, entered through a tower modeled after the main gate of Christ's College, Cambridge. Regarding aesthetics, reception of the building was mixed. In February of 1970, an article in the student newspaper The Torch revealed student opinion of the new building. These opinions ranged from, "It looks like a jukebox," to, "I wanted to drive in and say, fill her up with regular and check the oil." On the whole, however, the reception was positive, particularly regarding the interior of the building. Dick Lee noted that the architect was very attentive to the quality of materials. Interior and exterior brick, rich woodwork, and exposed beams, which you see here and there on the lower left, is what the lecture hall originally looked like. Here are some images from the architectural record of building supplies from exactly this period, and I think you'll recognize that from your experiences in Mueller Hall. Even the accordion doors, which are kind of ubiquitous in mid-century architecture, and ours are of a particularly high quality. These features made the building feel less institutional and bland than the exterior might suggest. At least upstairs, this was a beautiful building, a cut above other academic buildings on campus, with wide hallways, and as Dean Bepler said, a sense of leisure, and that's displayed very nicely in this rendering on the left. A look at what the architect imagined the commons would be used for, this kind of casual socializing and study. The committee chose furnishings on the cutting edge of design. In addition to the Mueller family gift, the Aid Association for Lutherans gave $31,000 for interior furnishings, in part because the college was also promoted as a future conference center. Lee and Bepler, sometimes with Dick Brower, trekked up to the Chicago Merchandise Mart and picked what they liked. seating furniture, tables, and lighting fixtures by top-quality international designers. In this slide, you see Eero Saarinen in the upper left with some of his mid-century work, and the radical plastic furniture of Eero Aarnio. When Bepler and Lee saw Saarinen's womb chair, the chair on the right in this image, they said, "We don't know where we'll put it, but we have to have it." In this later photo, a student and the student behind him are sitting in some of the coolest modern furniture that money could buy at the time. Bepler and Lee also selected furniture for its flexibility, which you see here in the modular system by the Commons fireplace. Much of this furniture is gone now, although you can still find remnants here and there, including, I confess, in my office. The design team clearly had purpose in mind. This room, for instance, at the far west end of the administrative hall, had no desks, just a coffee table for coffee mugs and the ubiquitous ashtrays of the period, and 8 or 9 Saarinen tulip chairs. The thought here, according to Bepler, who called this the discussion room, was that face-to-face engagement in a special place like this was about as honest as you could get. Dean Bepler was so insistent on personal discussion classes, in fact, that he made sure the building's small classrooms were insulated by thick walls that could not easily be removed. Egalitarian principles also show in the designs for the office area. The dean had a small work office connected to a larger room, which is shown to the right in the slide and also labeled Dean's Office. This room on the right was actually more of a meeting reception area for students, families, and staff. As it turned out, Dean Bepler occupied these rooms for only a short time. Not even 3 weeks after the building's dedication on April 26th, American campuses erupted in protest of the U.S. military's invasion of Cambodia. Here at Valpo, student protests got out of hand, and the university administration building burned in mysterious circumstances. President Hughley and his staff moved to the new administration complex of Mueller, and Hughley stayed there his entire presidency. His successor, Robert Schnabel, spent much of his administration there as well. According to Bepler, this turned out to be a good thing for CC because the president witnessed firsthand the vitality of the college's life, manifest in many ways from corridor conversation to bulletin board activity. Mueller Hall was designed for a community of about 200 students. Today there are about 350, and the building has had to adapt as well as cope with the ordinary wear and tear of student life. By the 1990s, Mueller Hall and its furnishings were looking shabby, and in the late 1990s, while Mark Twain was dean, Mueller underwent a major overhaul and update, led by architect and CC grad Gary Kleinschmidt. And here you see the entryway and the hallway updated, and the commons on the upper left, what it looked like before the renovation. On the lower right, much more what it looks like today. The refectory was also renewed around this time in 2002. In addition, a large seminar room was repurposed into 3 offices to house the growing faculty, which had been expanding to serve the growing student body. In 2009, a generous donor provided for the complete renovation of the courtyard with new plantings and paving. This is now a very pleasant place for classes, receptions, and socially distanced lunches. The last major renovation in 2015 tackled the long idle industrial kitchen, which had been used as a soup and sandwich shop for a short time only. This renovation, made possible by another generous gift from the Mueller family, resulted in our new seminar suite. Some things look different this fall, but what we were doing in Mueller is still the same. including what you see here in the lower right. These are first-year students discussing Aristotle's Ethics, a little muffled, but eager and engaged. Mueller Hall is one reason Christ College has thrived, as we integrate tradition with change and build bridges between disciplines. Of course, what matters most is not Mueller Hall itself, but what it contains, a lively community of dedicated learners and their important conversations. But it is also true that this building has helped to make that community possible. Well, thank you. I hope you've enjoyed this lecture. I welcome all questions and comments. Please send them to the email just below my face on the screen. And have a wonderful virtual homecoming.
So could you talk a little bit more about the Mueller Basement, which I know has been home to a lot of different academic departments throughout the years. We had a comment from one of our Twitter followers about a summer when she was taking meteorology courses in the Mueller Basement, and the air conditioning went out and they were just baking down there. And there's another famous seminar room down in the Mueller Basement, affectionately called the Coffin Room, which is another infamous space in Mueller. Would you want to talk a little bit about the basement and what other academic departments have come in and out of that part of the building?
Sure. I honestly don't know as much about the uses of the basement, and a lot of what I heard was sort of anecdotal. I'd hear stories. Apparently, the original heating system was the doors had louvered panels, and the heat, maybe the AC also had to come from the hallways into the classroom through the doors. So it was very uncomfortable down there. It was never warm enough or cool enough. And so at some point there was a major adjustment in those climate systems in the basement. I think the basement was also the place where programs, excuse me, programs tended to be. So I just saw an article about at the time that the building was built, the university invited the Lutheran Society for Worship, Music, and the Arts to pick up residents there. That organization had been around for 13 years. And so I think the university was using it as a space to reach out to the broader Lutheran universe and use those spaces for that. An article I was just looking at says, I mean, this may come as a surprise to people who actually took classes down here, but can you see that? It's from the torch right at the time that the building was built, and it says, a surprise to some is the sub-story. And I think it's a surprise because it really was not part of the plan until the very end. A brightly lit, colorful set of 8 large classrooms and 3 small ones. And then there's an emphasis on the whole building being air conditioned, but I'm not even sure which particular spaces that refers to. So 8 large classrooms, 3 small ones, and then there was a center core of really buried office spaces that were, maybe that would you say, Stephanie, there was a space that was called, the coffin room.
Yeah. I believe the class I had with you, Professor, was in that room. Yeah. I'm seeing someone else in the chat saying they took word and image in the coffin room.
My favorite classroom, which is sadly not being used right now. But for those of you who haven't seen it, it's a table that's in the shape. It looks like the shape of the windows on the front of Mueller Hall that students over the years have also noted that they look like coffins. So there's a motif. It's a decorative motif.
Yeah. Kind of dark. Well, we've got some interesting questions and comments coming in the chat. So Mike asks, you touched briefly on, was the refectory ever used regularly as a dining hall? And the new seminar space where the kitchen had been looks like a fantastic addition. So I'll let you talk a little bit about both of those, dining in the refectory and the new classroom where the kitchen used to be.
Good questions. The dining in the refectory, from what I heard from Dick Bepler and Dick Lee especially, the ambitions for that space were never achieved. I think in part because the residences were never built. I'm sure that has a big something to do with it. But it was a kind of soup and salad lunch place. As far as I know, at least on this campus, Valparaiso's never had a faculty club. And I think there were some faculty who used that as a place to have lunch with each other, although it was open. And maybe it technically was that kind of space for a while. But it's been closed off for decades. And when I first went into the space, I was amazed at how big it was. And it's kind of an archaeological adventure too, because there were cans of things that had been there probably since 1979 also, and really old kitchen equipment. I think we just junked it all, but at the time it was really beautiful kitchen. I, I think the founders of the college really took seriously that, to invoke Aristotle, that true friendships develop when people are sharing their spaces and meals and having these leisure times to engage with each other. And we honestly, that's been a problem in this building, that we haven't had that kind of a space where people can comfortably just show up and say, hey, let's have lunch. Now that we have the large union, that's nice. But I think inside this college, that was part of the original vision. And the questions about the new classrooms. What was the particular question about that, Stephanie?
Yeah, so the new, I pulled up a photo, so I'm going to share my screen again. But Mike had asked about the new classroom where the kitchen used to be. Talk a little bit about the space. Have you taught in there, or have you used that space at all?
Yes, so there are two classrooms, and we were trying to get classrooms that fit more students. So we can actually use, if I think 10 students, maybe 10 people fit in these spaces now with COVID restrictions. So we can actually still use these classrooms where we can't use some of the smaller Mueller classrooms at the moment.
Yeah. And you'll note that this photo is from 2017. So that's why there are more people.
Yeah, so more people unmasked. But the tech is really good. We anticipated using these for classes that would use projection. So even though you see the large windows on the side, there are screens that come down and you can make that classroom quite dark. Also, because it's on the south side of the building, you get some nice light in those classrooms that you don't get in other parts of Mueller. So that's really pleasant. Yeah. Another use for that space was ROTC was back there for many years. It was this kind of den area, secret office. Nobody really knew what happened back there, but they also went to another space when we cleaned out that for classrooms.
Yeah, Andrew was asking about the history of the fountain in the entrance.
Yes, yes. I wish I had an image of that to show you. I did have one in the original presentation. So at some point, Dick Bepler said to the architect, who I like water features. And lo and behold, he put a water feature, a fountain, in that entryway. And it wasn't there operative for very long. Bepler himself said he really didn't like it. He thought it looked like the cheesy entrance to a Greek pizza place, I think was his line. So the fountain was turned off, and it was a kind of plant area with just like a rock garden, I believe, for a while. And then in the 90s, around the time of that major renovation, around 1990, it was all removed. But do you remember the fountain there? I'm not sure how many. There definitely was one there, and it definitely didn't operate very long. And most of you who remember it in that post fountain life when it was just a planter. You know,
if I may add, one of my favorite memories as a senior was that there was a sign up for the women students for Venus on the Half Shell.
That's excellent. Yeah, I mean, I can think of a lot of wonderful possibilities for it, but those things are also really hard to maintain. And I imagine it was noisy, which...
One more comment too, in our group, several of us living in Guild Hall at the time participated. Cheryl Breitenbeker, who doesn't appear to have attended today, made some origami plagues. So there were locusts and things, and a couple of women hid in the restroom and placed them out there before the dedication. Of course, somebody found them that morning and took them away, but...
Wonderful. I'm gonna have to write that one down. That's great CC humor.
So Barbara is asking about the bust of OP that was relocated from the chapel to Mueller Hall. Do you have any idea why that may have been, or talk about that process at all?
Great question. I don't. It's in the comments at this point. Yeah, I really don't know. There's currently a project to put a life-size O.P. Kretzmann on campus somewhere. I don't know what the state of that is at the moment, but he'll be out there life-size soon. I don't know why it came back to Mueller. I know there's a strong connection between the OP and the Honors College, and I'm sure in part it was to acknowledge that.
Yeah. It's another interesting question from Jonathan. He asks, in your research on the building, did you find anything about the future of Mueller Hall? How long was it envisioned to last by those who commissioned it? And what are the thoughts today about the long-term future of the building? Any ideas on expansion, adding those residential wings?
Good question. I think really the buildings of this era, as maybe ordinary as they seem relative to other campuses that have, Gothic megastructures and so forth, these are really solid, well-constructed buildings. In fact, better in some ways than the buildings of old campus, where the quality of the brick was rather poor. And when, for instance, Heritage Hall down at the law school, the former law school, sadly, but down in that direction, that building, there was no way to restore that building. The brick was in such poor condition that they had to just take it down and then reconstruct on the footprint of the original building. The materials are here really excellent. In fact, I was just reading this article, and this is kind of the sort of thing we still hear on campus naturally. So I'm going to read you this whole thing because it's fun. So February 1970, as financial aid is cut and tuition rises due to growing funding problems here at VU, many students may not understand how the university can afford to build yet another building, especially one with wood paneling and brick floors. And then they go on to explain how it's all paid for by a donor and the money couldn't have been used for other things, standard fare there. But I think even at the time it was recognized that this was a higher quality building than other buildings on campus. We have all the problems that buildings from this era have, problems with flat roofs and Midwestern weather. We've had to clean the fascia, which is that band that goes around the edge of the roof because it stains from water damage. That's been done since I've been here. old pipes cause problems like that. But I think, Jonathan, mostly it's a really good building, and we hope that this just continues. I think we all certainly believe that it's really important for Christ College to have its own space on campus. I think you probably all agree with that there was something special about this building in your memories of being here. And I think it's also really nice that it's not just a Christ College building, that Christ College has a home here, but we share it with other departments, other offices. And it's, because I research mid-century building, I've come to grow fond of these things for historic reasons. And I think the entrance is a little quirky, that whole thing with Christ College and the sort of grand entrance and that coffin-shaped windows and all of that. But it's actually, good design for that period, especially when you compare it to public schools from that era, which I'm sure some of you suffered through. Does that answer your question? I think it's solid. I'm currently on the campus planning and space allocation committee, and this is not a building that we have major problems with in terms of systems and so forth. We did just last year repaint a lot of the surfaces in the basement so that there's a accent color wall in each of the classrooms, which really helps. Carpeting in a lot of the classrooms, most of them, I think. And the floor was just painted, the hallway floor was just painted a bright white last summer, which really raises it's cheerier down there than you might remember. And I think that's important.
Yeah. That makes the space feel less compressed as well, too.
If I could be indulged with one more impish comment,
Please,
I might have to leave. Actually, I have several. My impish moments are my best moments. But at any rate, I can't remember whether Mark Schwain was still editor of The Torch when the announcement of consideration of dormitories came out. And in the Scorch that year, hopefully you still have the Scorch in April.
yes.
The title was Eugenics Experiments Planned.
I did see that. Putting them all together and seeing what happens, yeah.
But I'm going to leave soon. If you want more impish comments, contact me. I'd be happy to share them. I had a great time. My Valpo and Christ College experience was great liberation for me. And Dean Bepler was like an uncle, as was Arlen Meyer in the law school, who got me out of a little bit. I was never a troubled student in any way. I was a high performing good girl, but I had my moments of adventure. And Dick Lee too got me out of a scrape here. They're just a tiny one. I didn't know you needed permission to paint your dorm room. And Dean Roosh was going to charge me for this as a violation. I knew my parents would kill me. So anyway, those are examples.
Well, if you could get me your email also, I'd love documentation about the origami plague and other things that you remember. That would be great.
I'd love to.
Sally, when you leave, I'll take up the impish comments, because I did paint my dorm room and I never got, well, I got caught when I got sick and the dorm counselor came in and the wall was only half painted. So she let me sneak my fiance in to finish painting it.
Well, that's how I got in trouble for mine, because my boyfriend at the time and Diane Kesters came in to help us paint, and we lost track of when men were allowed to be in. Well, that was Guildhall. Were allowed to be in, and they were about 15 minutes late as they were washing out the pans, and our RA caught us and said, "What are they doing here?"
Well, those sound like typical Valpo stories, certainly that span the ages too. And I'm sure Professor Buggeln would love to hear more about your CC experiences and anything else about Mueller Hall as she continues her research. Professor Buggeln, could you share your email address with the group again one more time? Maybe spell it for folks so that they can take that down if they'd like to share with you.
Sure, it's just my name, Gretchen, GretchenBuggeln @valpo.edu.